"Can we spend Christmas with you?" the poor mother's daughter asked a billionaire. And what happens next is unbelievable. Snow fell slowly over the streets of Vermont. It was Christmas Eve, and the small town looked like something straight out of a postcard. Lights hanging from poles, decorated shop windows, and families walking in and out of stores with bags full of gifts. Sarah Collins held her daughter's hand tightly, not because she was afraid of losing her in the crowd, but because she needed to feel like she still had something that was hers alone. Ava was 6 years old, with blonde hair falling to her shoulders and clear blue eyes that sparkled even when there was no reason to. She walked beside her mother without complaining, but Sarah knew. She knew the girl was hungry. She knew that thin coat wasn't enough for the cold. She knew that, on this night, there would be no gift, no dinner, and no Christmas tree, because they didn't have a home. Sarah was 34 years old and she was exhausted, tired of counting pennies, tired of looking for work, tired of waking up, not knowing if she could feed her daughter, tired of pretending everything was okay when Ava asked if they were ever going to have a better place to live. They walked down Main Street without a clear destination. Sarah just wanted her daughter to be distracted by the lights, the windows, and anything that made that night feel a little less empty. That's when they passed in front of Miller's Diner. It was a simple restaurant, the kind you find in small towns, with wooden tables and checkered tablecloths. Through the foggy window, you could see people eating, laughing, and making toasts. Entire families gathered together, children with chocolate on their faces, couples holding hands. Ava stopped. She slowly let go of her mother's hand and pressed her face against the freezing glass, her eyes fixed on what was inside. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. "Ava, let's go," she said softly, trying to pull the girl's hand, but Ava didn't budge. She kept staring as if she were trying to lock that scene into her memory. "Mommy." Her voice was gentle. "They're eating cake." Sarah swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say, so she just stood there holding that tiny, freezing hand, feeling the cold cut through her face. The wind blew harder. Ava shivered a little but kept looking inside the restaurant, fascinated. It was at that moment that Ava turned her head to the side. Outside the restaurant, leaning against the wall near the door, stood a man. He was tall, wearing a simple dark coat, hands in his pockets. His brown hair was slightly messy from the snow. He was looking straight ahead, but he didn't seem to see anything. He didn't look like he was waiting for anyone. Ava watched him for a few seconds, her little blonde head tilted. There was something about the way he stood that caught her attention. Maybe it was the fact that he was alone on a night like this, or maybe it was the empty expression on his face, as if he were lost. Sarah noticed her daughter's gaze and frowned. "Ava, what is it?" The girl didn't answer. She let go of her mother's hand again and took a step toward the man. "Ava," Sarah called out, but her voice came out too low. Ava stopped right in front of him. The man looked down and saw her there, so small, with blonde hair full of snow, looking at him with that pure innocence only a child has. He froze. Ava tilted her head to the side, the way she always did when she was thinking about something important. She stayed silent for a few seconds, just observing. And then she asked in a sweet voice, "Mister, can we spend Christmas with you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's eyes widened, and she ran to her daughter, her face burning with embarrassment. "Ava, for heaven's sake!" She grabbed the girl by her shoulders and looked at the man. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's saying." The man didn't answer immediately. He kept looking at Ava, as if he were trying to process what he had just heard. Jonathan Reed was 42 years old. He owned several companies, had more money than he could ever spend, and could have been anywhere in the world that night. In Paris, in New York, at some luxury resort, but he was there. In front of a simple restaurant in a small town, alone, because he had nowhere to go, because he had no one waiting for him, because everyone who had ever passed through his life had left, tired of his coldness, his silence, and the distance he kept. He looked at the blonde girl, then at the mother. He saw the thin coat, the hands red from the cold, the embarrassed way Sarah tried to pull her daughter back, and then he felt something strange in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Jonathan took a step forward and, without saying a word, opened the restaurant door. The warmth from inside hit their faces. The smell of food came with it. He looked at Sarah, then at Ava, and finally spoke. "Come in. You can choose whatever you want." Sarah froze. "What?" "Come in," he repeated, holding the door open. Ava had already started walking inside, but Sarah held her back again. "No, we can't accept this. It was a misunderstanding." Jonathan interrupted her, looking straight into her eyes. "So it wasn't a misunderstanding." She asked, "I'm accepting, come in." Sarah hesitated. She looked at her daughter, whose eyes were already sparkling, then back at the man. He didn't look like he was joking. He didn't look like he was doing charity out of pity. He just looked tired of being alone. After a few seconds, Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you." They went inside. The restaurant was full, noisy and cozy. The smell of food made Sarah's stomach growl, but she pretended not to notice. Jonathan guided them to a table near the window. He pulled out a chair for Ava, who sat down looking very proud. Sarah sat on the other side, still not knowing where to look. Her hands were shaking a little. Jonathan sat down last quiet. The waiter appeared seconds later, smiling. "Good evening, menus for everyone." Jonathan took the 3 menus and pushed 2 of them forward, one for Sarah, one for Ava. "Pick whatever you feel like." Ava opened the menu with excitement, her little blue eyes scanning the options. "Mommy, look, they have pancakes and milkshakes and cheesy fries." Sarah forced a smile, but inside she was stuck. She discreetly looked at the prices and felt a knot in her stomach. "Ava, we're just going to order some soup, okay?" Ava pouted. "But I wanted pancakes." Jonathan, who had been silent, spoke without taking his eyes off the menu. "She can have the pancakes. And the milkshake, too. And fries if she wants." Sarah looked at him, startled. "No, there's no need for all that." He looked up and met her gaze. There was no irritation in his eyes, just weariness. "Let her order what she wants." Sarah swallowed hard. She wasn't going to argue. She just nodded. The waiter returned with a pen in hand. Ava ordered everything with enthusiasm. Pancakes with chocolate syrup, cheesy fries, and a strawberry milkshake. Sarah ordered just a simple sandwich. Jonathan ordered coffee and toast. When the waiter left, an awkward silence settled between them. Sarah fidgeted with her hands, nervous. Jonathan stared out the window. Ava swung her little legs under the table, happy. It was Ava who broke the silence. "Do you live alone?" she asked, tilting her head. Sarah's eyes went wide. "Ava!" Jonathan turned to the girl and managed something close to a smile. "I do." "Why?" Ava insisted. Sarah covered her face with her hands. "Ava, stop!" But Jonathan didn't seem bothered. He looked at the girl as if no one had ever asked him that question before. "Because that's just how it is. It's always been that way." Ava wrinkled her forehead, thoughtful. "Do you like Christmas?" He took a while to answer. He looked away toward the window as if the question hurt. "Does not really." "Why?" Sarah was almost dying of embarrassment, but Jonathan kept answering, "Because I've never had anyone to spend it with." The honesty of those words fell on the table like a stone. Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "We don't have anyone either, but now we have you." Sarah felt her eyes sting. Jonathan fell silent. He looked at the girl, then at the mother, and something inside him shifted, something that had been dormant for years. The food arrived a few minutes later, steaming and fragrant. Ava ate heartily, smiling between every bite. Sarah ate slowly, trying not to look desperate. Jonathan barely touched his own food. He just sat there, watching the two of them. He saw the way Sarah carefully cut her daughter's food, the way Ava laughed when she got milkshake on her nose, the way the two of them looked at each other and understood one another without needing to say a word. He never had that. He never had anyone look at him that way. He never had a table full of laughter. Ava told stories about school between bites. She talked about the teacher who was nice. She talked about the boy who lent her a colored pencil. She talked about the Christmas song they were practicing. Jonathan listened to it all, without interrupting. Sarah also started to relax a bit. She talked about the temporary job that had just ended. She mentioned how hard it was to find something permanent. She didn't go into details, but Jonathan noticed. He read between the lines. "What do you do for work?" Ava asked curiously. "I own a few businesses," he answered simply. "Are you rich?" Ava asked with brutal honesty. "Ava," Sarah nearly choked. Jonathan gave a small smile. "More or less?" "Then why are you alone on Christmas?" Ava tilted her head. "Rich people don't stay alone." The question caught him off guard. He stayed quiet, searching for the right answer. "Money doesn't buy real company," he finally said. Ava seemed to understand. She nodded seriously and kept eating. When they finished, the waiter brought the check. Sarah tried to reach for it, but Jonathan had already put his card down before she could see the amount. "I was going to try to help." "No need," he cut her off gently. Sarah was left speechless. "Thank you. Truly. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means." They stood up. Sarah adjusted Ava's coat, preparing to face the cold again. But before crossing the door, Ava turned around. She ran to Jonathan, and she hugged his leg with all the strength she had, her little face pressed against his coat. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled. Jonathan stood paralyzed. He didn't know what to do with his hands. No one had hugged him in years. Then slowly, he placed his hand on her little blonde head and left it there for a few seconds. Ava let go, took a step back, and smiled at him with that smile that could light up any room. Sarah smiled too, her eyes glistening. "Good night, and thank you again." "Good night," Jonathan replied, his voice almost fading. They left. The restaurant door closed behind them, and Jonathan stood there looking through the window as the two of them disappeared into the snow. He didn't promise to see them again. Neither did they. They didn't exchange phone numbers. They didn't make any plans, but something had changed. Something invisible but real. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan Reed didn't feel completely alone, and Sarah Collins, walking through the snow with her daughter by her side, felt that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. The snow continued to fall over Vermont, and 3 lives had just crossed paths in a way none of them could have imagined yet. The walk back was silent. Sarah held Ava's hand tightly as they crossed the snow-covered streets. The wind had died down a little, but the cold was still biting. Ava walked beside her, quiet, still with that sparkle in her eyes from someone who had experienced something special. "Mommy, he was nice, wasn't he?" Ava asked suddenly, looking up. Sarah forced a smile. Yes, he was, honey. Do you think we'll see him again?" Sarah didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to take away the girl's hope either. "I don't know, Ava. He must have his own life. We got lucky today." Ava nodded thoughtfully and kept walking. They turned onto a narrower street, away from the town center, where the Christmas lights no longer reached. The houses were smaller, older, some with peeling paint. Sarah stopped in front of a 2-story boarding house with a faded sign in front. She pulled the key from her pocket and opened the creaking door. The hallway was dark and smelled like mildew. Sarah walked up the stairs, holding Ava's hand firmly until they reached the 2nd floor. She opened the door to room number 7. The room was small, very small. There was a twin bed pushed against the wall, a thin blanket on top, and 2 pillows without cases. Beside it, an old small table with a broken chair. The window had a torn curtain that let the cold in. There was no heater. There was nothing beyond the basics. Ava went in and took off her coat, hanging it on the chair. Sarah closed the door slowly and leaned against it for a moment, just breathing. "Mommy, I'm sleepy," Ava said, rubbing her eyes. "Go to sleep, honey. Go lie down." Ava climbed onto the bed and curled up in the thin blanket. Sarah tucked the cover around her, trying to wrap her well so the cold wouldn't get through. She kissed the girl's forehead. "Good night, my love." "Good night, Mommy." Sarah waited until Ava closed her eyes. Then she went to the table and sat in the chair. She opened the old bag she carried and pulled out a worn-out wallet. She opened it slowly. She counted the coins she had. Then she counted them again as if the number might magically change. $12.60. That was all that was left. She put the coins back in the wallet and closed her eyes, trying to think, trying to calculate, trying to find a way out. Next week's rent was due in 3 days, $25. She didn't have it. Not even close. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her sleeping daughter. Ava was on her side, with her little hands under her face, breathing slowly. She looked so small, so fragile. And Sarah didn't know how she was going to protect her. She remembered the dinner from earlier, the warm food, the heat of the restaurant, the way the man, Jonathan, she barely even knew his name, had been kind without expecting anything in return. She felt gratitude, but she also felt shame. Shame for having accepted. Shame for having let her daughter ask a stranger for food. Shame for being in that situation, depending on the kindness of others to get a decent meal. She leaned her elbows on the table and held her head in her hands. That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. There was a knock on the door. Sarah stood up quickly, her heart racing. She looked at Ava, who was still sleeping. She went to the door and opened it slowly. It was the landlady. A woman in her 50s, hair pulled back in a tight bun, face tired and expressionless. "Sarah," she said bluntly, getting straight to the point, "I need to talk to you." "Now," Sarah whispered, looking back to make sure Ava hadn't woken up. "It'll only take a minute." Sarah stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind her. The woman crossed her arms. "Sarah, look, you know I'm not a bad person. I let you stay here because I saw you were in a tough spot, but the room was supposed to be temporary." Sarah felt the floor disappear from under her feet. "I know, I'm looking for work. I swear I am. I just need a little more time." "There is no more time, Sarah. I have someone interested in the room. Someone who can pay in advance. You have until the end of the week." "End of the week? But that's only 3 days away." "I know. I'm sorry. But it's what I have to do." The woman didn't wait for a response. She turned her back and walked down the stairs, leaving Sarah standing there alone in the dark hallway. Sarah went back into the room and closed the door slowly. She leaned against it and slid down to the floor, her legs shaking. 3 days. 3 days to find money. 3 days to find another place. 3 days before they were on the street again. She looked at Ava sleeping. The girl had a peaceful face, knowing nothing. Knowing nothing of her mother's despair. Knowing nothing of the fact that they had nowhere to go, Sarah stood up slowly and went to the bed. She sat on the edge, looking at her daughter. She carefully ran her hand through Ava's blonde hair, trying not to wake her. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice choked. "I'm sorry for not being able to give you a better life. I'm sorry for not being enough." Ava moved a little, still sleeping, and hugged the thin blanket tighter. Sarah sat there looking at her daughter, feeling the weight of everything crash down on her. She thought about all the choices she had made, all the mistakes, all the doors that had closed. She thought about Ava's father, who left before the girl was even born. She thought about the family she no longer had. She thought about the jobs she had lost. She thought about how she got here, and she couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears began to fall, silent and hot. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand to make no noise. She didn't want Ava to wake up. She didn't want the girl to see her cry. She didn't want her to know how bad everything was. She lay down beside her daughter, on her side, looking at Ava's small, peaceful face. She pulled the thin blanket over both of them and tried to get warm, but the cold of the room was greater than any cover. The wind beat against the window. The torn curtains swayed. The room was dark, with only a little streetlight coming through the cracks. Sarah stayed awake for hours, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to think of some solution, some way out, some miracle, but she couldn't find anything. She thought again about the man from the restaurant, about how kind he had been, about how he had looked at them with something like care, but he was a stranger. She couldn't expect anything from him. She couldn't count on anyone but herself, and in that moment, alone in the cold room with her sleeping daughter and 3 days to find a solution, Sarah felt smaller than ever. She felt the weight of loneliness, the weight of responsibility, the weight of being alone in the world, trying to protect a child who depended entirely on her. Ava sighed in her sleep and snuggled closer to her mother. Sarah hugged her tightly, as if that embrace could protect her daughter from everything that was to come. "I'll find a way," she whispered in the dark, more to herself than to anyone else. "I promise I'll find a way." But deep down, Sarah didn't know if she could keep that promise. The silence of the room was interrupted only by the sound of the wind outside, and Sarah Collins lay there, awake, holding back her tears, as Christmas morning approached and time kept passing without mercy. 3 days after the dinner at the restaurant, Jonathan was walking through the town centre. It was mid-afternoon. The sky was grey and the snow had stopped falling, but the cold remained steady. The streets were full of people doing last-minute Christmas shopping. Lights blinked in shop windows. Christmas music played somewhere. Jonathan walked with his hands in his pockets, looking forward without really seeing anything. He had left the house just to get out. He had no destination, no reason. He just didn't want to be locked up alone again. Since that night at the restaurant, something was different. He couldn't stop thinking about the two of them, about the blonde, clear-eyed girl who had asked if they could spend Christmas with him, about the mother who tried to hide her despair behind a tired smile. He was lost in those thoughts when he heard a high-pitched voice calling, "Jonathan!" He stopped instantly. He turned his head, surprised, and he saw Ava running toward him, her blonde hair flying behind her, her little coat open, a huge smile on her face. Jonathan stood paralyzed. No one ever ran toward him like that. No one ever shouted his name with such joy. Ava stopped in front of him, out of breath, looking up with those sparkling eyes. "It's you. I saw you from far away." Sarah appeared right behind her, in a hurry, her face red with embarrassment. "Ava, my goodness, you can't just run off like that." She grabbed her daughter by the shoulder and looked at Jonathan, flustered. "I'm sorry. She saw you and ran before I could catch her." Jonathan remained standing, still processing what was happening. "It's okay," he said, his voice low. Sarah gave a small, still awkward smile, but there was something different in her gaze. It wasn't just embarrassment, there was affection too. "We were just passing by," Sarah explained, "doing some shopping." "Well, it's window shopping, actually." Jonathan nodded. He didn't know what to say. Small talk had never been his strength. Ava, however, had no such problem. "Jonathan, guess what?" she started, all excited. "I didn't get a Christmas present this year." Sarah's eyes widened. "Ava." But the girl continued with that brutal childhood honesty. "But it's okay. I was a good girl all year. My teacher said I was one of the best students. So it's no problem not getting a present, right?" The words hit Jonathan like a punch to the chest. He looked at the girl with that innocent little face, smiling as if she truly believed everything was fine, as if not getting anything for Christmas was acceptable as long as she had been good. Jonathan felt something strange rise in his throat. He didn't know if it was anger, sadness, or something else that had no name. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there looking at her, his chest tight. Sarah put her hand on her daughter's shoulder, trying to change the subject. "Ava, you don't need to be talking about those things." "But it's true, Mommy," Ava said innocently. "I really didn't get one, but it's okay." Jonathan swallowed hard. He looked at Sarah, who looked away, clearly ashamed. Ava, oblivious to the adults' discomfort, kept talking. "Jonathan, do you spend a lot of time alone?" He blinked, bringing his attention back to her. "What?" "Alone," Ava repeated, tilting her head. "You said you have no one to spend Christmas with, so are you alone always?" Sarah closed her eyes, mortified. "Ava, please." Jonathan looked at the girl. He could lie. He could deflect, but he didn't. "Yes," he answered sincerely. "I'm alone most of the time." "Why?" Ava asked, genuinely curious. "Ava," Sarah tried to intervene again, but Jonathan raised his hand slowly, a gesture that said it was okay. "Because," he searched for the right words, "because I was never very good at making friends." Ava wrinkled her forehead, thinking about it. "But you're nice. You let us have dinner with you. Nice people have friends." Jonathan gave a small, sad smile. "It doesn't always work that way." "Do you have friends?" Ava insisted. He hesitated. He thought about the people he knew, his partners, his employees. The people who showed up at events only because he was rich. Not many, he finally answered. Ava was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said something that caught Jonathan by surprise. Then we can be your friends. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Jonathan looked at the girl with those blue eyes full of innocence and felt something inside him break, a small but deep crack. You want to? He asked, his voice lower than usual. I do, Ava answered without hesitation. And Mommy wants to too, right, Mommy? Sarah turned red, but she looked at Jonathan and nodded slowly. That would be nice, yes. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to handle it. He had spent so much time alone that he no longer remembered what it was like to have someone care. They stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, with people passing on both sides, but it felt like they were alone in the world. Ava took his hand without asking permission. Jonathan looked at the small hand holding his. He didn't remember the last time someone had done that. He didn't remember the last time someone had touched him with affection, without an agenda, without expecting anything. Sarah gave a small smile. I'm sorry for all of this, she said softly. You don't need to apologize, Jonathan replied sincerely. They stayed there for a few more minutes, talking about simple things. Ava told stories about school, pointed at the shop windows, and asked random questions. Jonathan answered little, but he listened to everything. Every word, every laugh. Sarah watched the two of them with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. She didn't understand why a man like him was alone. She didn't understand why he accepted staying with them, but she didn't question it either. She was just grateful. After a while, Ava let go of Jonathan's hand and ran to a window full of toys. She pressed her face against the glass, her eyes sparkling. Look at that doll, she pointed excitedly. Jonathan looked. It was a simple doll, dressed in red, nothing fancy. But Ava looked at it as if it were the most beautiful thing in the world. Sarah approached and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. It really is pretty. Jonathan stood there, watching the two of them. He saw the way Sarah touched her daughter with affection. He saw the way Ava leaned on her mother with total trust, and he realized something. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to go back to an empty house. He didn't want to spend another day alone. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Reed wanted to be a part of something. He wanted to belong, and he was starting to realize that those two, an exhausted mother and a girl full of hope, were doing something to him that no one else ever could. They were making him feel human again. The next day, Jonathan left the house with no set destination. He had woken up thinking about them again, about Ava saying she hadn't gotten a Christmas present, about Sarah trying to hide her shame, about that innocent smile from the girl saying everything was okay, even though it wasn't. Jonathan walked through the streets without a rush, hands in his pockets, watching the town prepare for Christmas. People carried bags, laughed, and hugged one another. He remained alone in the middle of it all. That's when he passed in front of a small toy shop. Normally, he wouldn't even look. He had no reason. There were no children in his life, no one to buy a gift for. But this time he stopped. In the window, right in the center, was a doll. It was simple, nothing fancy. It wore a little red Christmas outfit with white details on the sleeves and a tiny hat on its head. The face had a painted smile, and the eyes were clear. It looked delicate but sturdy. Jonathan stood there looking at the doll, and he remembered. He remembered Ava in front of the window the day before, pointing at a doll just like that one. He remembered the sparkle in her eyes. He remembered the way Sarah had put her hand on her daughter's shoulder, saying nothing, but with that expression of someone who wanted to give everything and couldn't. Jonathan looked around. He hesitated for a moment. Then he pushed the door and entered the shop. The place was small, cramped, and full of shelves with toys of all kinds. It smelled like new plastic and paint. A woman in her 60s was behind the counter, organizing boxes. "Good afternoon," she said, smiling. "Can I help you?" Jonathan pointed to the window. "The doll there. How much is it?" The lady went to the window, picked up the doll carefully, and brought it to the counter. "This is one of the last ones I have. $12. Jonathan pulled out his wallet without a second thought. "Can you wrap it?" "Sure. Would you like gift wrap?" "No need," Jonathan said quickly. Just a bag is fine. The lady nodded and placed the doll in a simple paper bag. Jonathan paid, took the bag, and left the shop. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, holding the bag, wondering what he was doing. He wasn't the type to give gifts. He wasn't the type to get involved. He wasn't the type to make spontaneous gestures of that kind. But there he was, with a doll in his hand, thinking about a girl he barely knew. Jonathan went back home and placed the bag on the kitchen table. He stared at it for a while, as if trying to decide if this was a good idea. In the end, he tucked the bag inside his coat. Empty paragraph. Later, in the late afternoon, Jonathan went back to the town center. He went to the same spot where he had found Ava and Sarah the day before. He stopped near a window, pretending he was looking at something, but he was actually waiting for them to show up. He didn't know if they would pass by there again. He didn't know if he would have the courage to hand over the gift, but he stayed there anyway, with the bag hidden inside his coat, his heart beating faster than usual. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Jonathan was starting to think he had been foolish, that they weren't going to show up, that he would go home with the doll and feel ridiculous for trying. That's when he heard that voice again. "Jonathan!" He turned his head and saw Ava running toward him, again with that huge smile on her face. Sarah followed behind, slower, but also smiling when she saw him. Ava stopped in front of him, out of breath. "You're here again. I told Mommy I would see you." Jonathan gave a small smile. "Did I see Ava?" Sarah arrived right after, fixing her hair that the wind had messed up. "Hi," she said, a bit awkwardly. "Quite a coincidence, right?" Jonathan nodded, trying to look natural. "Yeah, I was just walking around here." They stood there talking for a few minutes. Ava mentioned she had helped her mother look for work during the day. Sarah explained they had gone to a few places, but nothing yet. Jonathan listened attentively, noticing the worry hidden in her voice. After a while, Jonathan felt the bag weighing inside his coat. It was now or never. He reached into his coat and pulled out the paper bag. He held it for a moment, hesitating, then held it out to Ava. "It's for you." Ava's eyes went wide with surprise. She looked at the bag, then at him. "For me?" "Yeah." Sarah took a step forward, her expression shifting to something between embarrassment and refusal. "Jonathan, no. You don't need to do this. You've already done too much." "It's just a gift," Jonathan said simply, still holding the bag. "Fortunate nothing more than that." Sarah opened her mouth to protest again, but Ava had already taken the bag from his hands. The girl opened it slowly, curious, and reached inside. When she pulled the doll out, her face lit up completely. "It's the doll," she said, marveling. "About the doll I saw in the window." She held the doll with both hands, with all the care in the world, as if she were holding something fragile and precious. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. Ava looked at Jonathan with those sincere blue eyes, sparkling with emotion. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice low but full of feeling. There was no long speech, no exaggeration. It was simple, true. Jonathan swallowed hard. He felt something tighten in his chest, something he couldn't name. "You're welcome," he managed to say, his voice husky. Ava hugged the doll against her chest and smiled at him again. "She's perfect. I'm going to take care of her forever." Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, trying not to cry in front of him. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say. This is... You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he answered, looking at her. "It wasn't an obligation. I wanted to give it." Sarah was silent for a moment, just looking at him. Then she nodded slowly, with a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." Ava continued holding the doll, looking at it with so much affection that Jonathan felt a strange pang in his chest. He had never seen anyone so happy with something so simple. "What should I call her?" Ava asked, more to herself than to the others. "You decide," Sarah said, running her hand through her daughter's hair. Ava thought for a moment, looking serious. "I'm going to call her Holly, because of Christmas." Jonathan gave a small smile. "That's a good name." Ava looked at him again, and, without warning, took a step forward and hugged his leg, just like she had at the restaurant. "I thank you again." Jonathan stood frozen for a second, but this time he placed his hand on her head faster. He left it there, feeling the soft hair, her small warmth. Sarah watched everything with her eyes still shining with held-back tears. When Ava let go, she took another step back and held the doll again, smiling. "So now I have a Christmas present." Jonathan nodded, unable to say much. They stayed there for a few more minutes, talking about small things, but the mood had changed. There was something deeper now, something that went beyond chance meetings on the street. It was a connection. When they finally said goodbye, Jonathan stood watching the two of them walk away. Ava was skipping, clutching her doll, talking non-stop. Sarah looked back once and waved with a sincere smile. Jonathan waved back. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had done something right. Something that mattered. Something that touched not only another person's life, but his own as well. He went home that night with a lighter chest, with something like hope growing inside him, and he realized that simple gesture, giving a doll to a girl he barely knew, had changed something inside him. It had opened a door that had been locked for years, and he didn't want to close it anymore. 2 days after giving the doll to Ava, Jonathan was walking through the town center again. It had become a habit. He would go out in the late afternoon, pass through the same places, hoping to find the two of them. He didn't admit it out loud, but it was true. He was looking for them. And on that day, he found them. But something was different. Sarah was sitting on a park bench with Ava beside her, playing with the doll in her lap. But Sarah's face was tired, more tired than usual. Her shoulders were slumped. She was looking forward, but she seemed to be seeing nothing. Jonathan approached slowly. "Hi," he said softly. Sarah looked up, and when she saw him, forced a smile. "Hi, Jonathan." Ava looked up, and her face lit up. "Jonathan!" She jumped off the bench and ran to him, hugging his leg. "Look, Holly is here with me." She showed him the doll, looking very proud. Jonathan smiled and ran his hand over her head. "Are you taking good care of her?" "I am. She sleeps with me every night." Ava went back to the bench, hugging her doll. Jonathan sat beside Sarah. He stayed silent for a few seconds, observing her profile. He saw the tension in her shoulders. He saw the way she took deep breaths. "Did something happen?" Jonathan asked quietly. Sarah stayed quiet for a moment. She bit her lip. She seemed to be deciding whether to speak or not. Then she took a deep sigh. "The temporary job I had, it's over." Jonathan frowned. "Over how?" "The contract ended. It was only until the end of the year. I knew that from the beginning, but—" She stopped, her voice faltering. "I was hoping they would renew it, or that I'd find another one before, but I didn't." Jonathan stayed silent, just listening. Sarah continued, her voice lower. "It was that job that paid for the room we're in, and the food, and everything. Without it, She took a deep breath, trembling. "I don't know what I'm going to do now." Jonathan saw the way she clenched her hands in her lap. He saw her eyes turning red. "How much time do you have?" he asked. "Until tomorrow," Sarah answered, her voice breaking. "The landlady said someone wants the room. She gave me until tomorrow to move out." Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest. "And do you have anywhere to go?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No." The silence that followed was heavy. Ava continued playing on the other side of the bench, oblivious to the conversation. She was making the doll dance, humming a Christmas song quietly. Jonathan looked at the girl, then at Sarah. He saw the reality right there in front of him, unfiltered. They had nowhere to go, they had no one. They were alone in the world, on the verge of being on the street. Jonathan felt something different inside him, something he had never felt before. It was urgency, a need, a desire to act. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to stand by with folded arms. "Have you tried asking for help? Shelters? Churches?" he asked. Sarah gave a bitter smile. "I've tried. Everything is full because of the winter. The waiting lists are huge, and even if I got in, She stopped. "I'm afraid they'll take Ava from me. If they see I can't provide for her, they might take her away." Her voice broke completely. Jonathan felt his chest tighten even more. He hadn't thought of that. Of the possibility of them being separated. And family, he tried. "I don't have anyone," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "My parents died when I was young. I don't have siblings. Ava's father left before she was born. I have no one. Jonathan, literally no one." The way she said that made something move deep inside Jonathan. He stayed quiet, thinking, trying to find a solution. What if I... "No," Sarah cut him off. "I know what you're going to say, and I appreciate it, truly. But I can't accept anything else. You've already done too much. You don't owe me anything." Jonathan looked at her, steady. "It's not about owing, it's about wanting to help." Sarah shook her head, tears falling. "I can't become a burden in someone else's life. Carrying this alone is enough." Jonathan was about to answer, but Ava appeared in front of them, holding the doll. "Mommy, are you crying?" Sarah wiped her face quickly. "No, sweetie, I'm just tired." Ava looked at her, then at Jonathan suspiciously, but she didn't ask anything else. She simply climbed into her mother's lap and hugged her. "It's okay, Mommy, we always find a way." Sarah hugged her daughter back, closing her eyes. Jonathan watched it all in silence, feeling something grow inside him, a certainty, a decision forming. He stayed with them a little longer, but the conversation didn't return to that subject. Sarah changed the topic, pretending everything was fine. Ava went back to playing, but Jonathan saw. He saw the hidden despair. He saw the way Sarah hugged her daughter tightly. He saw the fear. When he said goodbye, he looked back and saw Sarah hugging Ava as they walked, and Jonathan went home with that hammering in his head. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He lay in the huge bed, in the huge bedroom, in the huge and empty house, thinking about the two of them. Thinking about the tiny room in the boarding house, thinking about Sarah not knowing what to do, thinking about Ava sleeping without understanding that the next day she could be on the street. He got up, went to the kitchen, made coffee but didn't drink it. He paced through the house, restless, trying to decide what to do. He could give money. That would be easy. But Sarah had already made it clear she wouldn't accept charity. He could try to find a job for her, but that would take time. Time they didn't have. He could try to pay for the boarding house room for a longer time. But then what? The problem would only repeat itself. Jonathan stopped in the middle of the living room, looking at the empty house around him. There was so much space there, so much empty space. Rooms that were never used. A huge kitchen where he never cooked. A house built for a family, but occupied only by him. He looked at the clock, 5 in the morning. He decided to act. At 7 in the morning, Jonathan left the house. He stopped at a grocery store and bought bags of supplies. Food, milk, bread, fruit, meat, rice, beans, pasta. Basic items that would last for days. He paid without looking at the total. Then he drove to the poorer part of town. He had found out where the boarding house was through discreet questions. He parked the car in front of the old building and grabbed the bags. He walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. He stopped in front of door number 7. He took a deep breath. He knocked. It took a few seconds. Then he heard footsteps. The door opened slowly. Sarah appeared, her hair messy, still in pajamas. Her eyes were swollen. When she saw him, her eyes went wide. "Jonathan, what are you doing here?" He lifted the bags. "I thought you guys might need this." Sarah stood still without a reaction. She looked at the bags, then at him. "How did you find out where I live?" "I asked around," he said simply. Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She shook her head. "No, Jonathan, I can't accept. I already told you." "I know what you told me," he interrupted her. "But I brought it anyway." "Jonathan, Sarah," he said, looking into her eyes, "just accept it, please." She was silent, her eyes filling with tears. Before she could answer, Ava appeared behind her, running. "Jonathan," she shouted, "you came here." She pushed past her mother and pulled his hand. "Come in. Come see." "I drew a lot." Sarah tried to hold her daughter back. "Ava, he's busy." "I'm not," Jonathan said quickly. Sarah looked at him, surprised. Jonathan shrugged. "Can I come in?" Sarah hesitated. She looked at the hallway, at the room, back at him. Then she sighed. "Okay, come in." The room was tiny, cold, a twin bed against the wall, an old table, a broken chair, a window with a torn curtain, but it was clean. He placed the bags on the small table. Ava had already pulled him to the bed, where there were drawings scattered around. "Look, this one is you." She pointed to a stick figure drawing with a dark coat. Jonathan looked and smiled. "It looks just like me. And this one is me, Mommy, and Holly." She showed another one. In the drawing, there were 3 figures holding hands and a doll on the side. "It's beautiful," Jonathan said sincerely. Ava picked up a colored pencil and held it out to him. "Draw with me." Jonathan looked at the pencil, then at the girl. He didn't know how to draw. He couldn't remember the last time he had held a colored pencil. But he sat on the floor anyway. Ava sat beside him, already starting another drawing. Jonathan took the pencil and started to doodle. Sarah stood near the door, watching the two of them. She saw Jonathan, a rich man, sitting on the floor of a miserable room, drawing with her daughter, and she felt her chest tighten. Jonathan gradually relaxed. He forgot about his stiffness. He just stayed there, drawing, listening to Ava talk non-stop. "You're bad at drawing," Ava said with total honesty. Jonathan let out a laugh. "I know. But it's okay. I'll teach you," she said seriously, taking the pencil from his hand and showing him how to do it better. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, watching. She saw the way Jonathan listened to Ava. She saw how he tried again. She saw how he smiled. And she realized something. He wasn't just there to help. He was there because he wanted to be. Because he liked being there, with them, in that tiny and cold room. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Sarah felt that maybe she wasn't completely alone, that maybe there was still someone who truly cared. In the following days, Jonathan returned, and he kept returning. In the beginning, it was every other day. Then it became every day. Always in the late afternoon, when the sun was starting to go down, and the cold became more intense. He always brought something, nothing extravagant, nothing that would make Sarah refuse, just simple things. One day it was fresh bread. Another day it was chocolate. Sometimes a children's storybook he had seen in a shop and thought of Ava, or drawing supplies, new colored pencils, notebooks, colored markers. Sarah complained at first. "Jonathan, you don't need to bring anything every time you come." But he just shrugged. "I know, but I wanted to," and she stopped complaining. Gradually, the dynamic between them changed. It became more natural, less formal. Jonathan started talking more, asking questions, taking a real interest. "How was your day?" he would ask when he arrived, sitting in the old chair as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Sarah would tell him. She talked about the places she had gone to look for work, the interviews that went nowhere, the doors that closed before she even finished speaking. Jonathan listened to everything with attention. He didn't interrupt. He didn't give unsolicited advice. He just listened. Sometimes he talked a little about his businesses, but never boasting, never making it seem like he was better or more important. He spoke simply, as if he were talking to a friend. "I had a meeting today that was a nightmare," he commented on one of those days. "The guy spoke for 2 hours without saying anything useful." Sarah gave a laugh, the first genuine laugh Jonathan had heard from her. "I know the type." And the conversation flowed. Ava, on the other hand, already treated Jonathan as part of the routine. When he arrived, she would run to the door and pull him by the hand. Come, see what I did today." And Jonathan would go, without resisting, letting himself be dragged by the 6-year-old girl. Ava showed him the new drawings, the improvised toys she made with cardboard boxes, the stories she invented. Jonathan would sit on the floor with her. They drew together. He listened to the wild stories that made no sense, but that she told with such seriousness. One day, Ava simply sat beside him on the floor and rested her head on his arm while she drew. Jonathan went stiff for a second. He didn't know if he should move or not, but Ava kept drawing calm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and Jonathan relaxed. He let her stay there. He felt the small, warm weight against his arm, and something inside him warmed up. Sarah watched these scenes from a distance, always quiet. She saw the way her daughter was becoming attached to Jonathan. She saw how he, bit by bit, was letting his defenses fall. She was afraid of getting too attached, afraid of Ava getting too attached, afraid that one day Jonathan would wake up and realize it didn't make sense, that he didn't need them in his life. But she couldn't help it, because Jonathan didn't seem to be there out of pity. He seemed to be there because he wanted to be. One night, after Ava fell asleep, Sarah and Jonathan sat talking quietly so as not to wake the girl. They were sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, with cups of tea in their hands that Sarah had made with the last tea bag she had. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, looking at her cup. "Sure. Why do you keep coming here?" Jonathan stayed quiet for a moment. He thought of the right answer. "Because I like being here," he said simply. Sarah looked at him, surprised. "But why? You have a whole life out there. You must have much better places to be." Jonathan shook his head slowly. You don't understand, Sarah. I have a huge house. I have money. I have businesses. But I don't have anything that truly matters. I have no one waiting for me. I have no one who cares if I show up or not." He stopped, looking at the cup in his hands. "Here is different. Here I feel alive. I feel like part of something." Sarah felt her eyes sting. "Jonathan." "You let me stay," he said, looking at her. "Can the two of you let me be part of this, even though I'm a stranger, even though I have nothing to offer, but—" "You have a lot to offer," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "You're here. That's already everything." Jonathan swallowed hard. He stayed silent for a while. Then Sarah started talking, things she didn't tell anyone, things she kept locked in her chest. She spoke about the parents she lost young, about how she felt alone in the world since then, about the man who got her pregnant and disappeared, about what it was like to discover she was going to be a mother alone, without having anyone to help. She spoke about the fear, the constant fear of failing, of not being enough, of not being able to protect her daughter. Jonathan listened to it all without interrupting, without judging. He just listened. And when she finished, with her voice choked, he simply said, "You're doing an incredible job with her. Ava is special because of you." Sarah wiped her eyes quickly. "Thank you for saying that." They stayed there in comfortable silence. They didn't need to fill every second with words. Just being there was enough. The days passed like this. Jonathan would show up, they talked, they played with Ava, they had dinner together, always simple things Sarah managed to make with the little she had, but that Jonathan ate as if it were the best meal in the world. Ava started calling him Jonathan with more affection. He wasn't the man from the street anymore. He was Jonathan, her friend, the person who showed up every day and stayed. One afternoon, Ava was tired and sleepy. She simply climbed onto the old couch where Jonathan was sitting and rested her head in his lap. Jonathan tensed for a second. He looked at Sarah as if asking for guidance. Sarah just smiled and signaled for him to stay quiet. Jonathan relaxed. He placed his hand carefully on the girl's head and stayed there, still while she slept. Sarah watched that with a tight heart. She saw the way Jonathan looked at her daughter, with care, with affection, with something that looked a lot like fatherly love, and she realized that this wasn't just help anymore. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was a family forming, slowly, without a rush, without forcing it, but it was happening. Jonathan, for his part, found himself smiling without realizing it. He caught himself laughing at something silly Ava said, or feeling at peace just sitting in that small room with those two people who had entered his life out of nowhere. He had spent years living in luxury environments, expensive dinners, five-star hotels, elegant parties with important people, but he had never felt at home in those places. Here, in this tiny and cold room with old furniture and cracked walls, he felt at home for the first time in his life. Sarah also began to open up more, telling more things, letting Jonathan into her life for real. She talked about the dreams she had when she was young, how she wanted to be a seamstress, to have her own shop, how everything crumbled and she had to survive on odd jobs, Jonathan listened, and sometimes he asked questions, the right questions, which showed he really cared. The atmosphere between the three of them was strange. Good, but strange. It was almost family. But no one said that out loud yet. No one put a name to what was happening. They just knew that when Jonathan left at the end of the night, the room felt emptier. And when he arrived the next day, everything felt lighter. Sarah began to realize she was waiting for him, that the day only truly began when he appeared at the door. Ava already asked every afternoon, "What time is Jonathan coming?" And Jonathan, driving there every day, realized that that small room had become his favorite place in the entire world, the place where he was just Jonathan, not the businessman, not the billionaire, not the lonely man. He was just Jonathan, the person Ava pulled by the hand, the person Sarah shared tea and late-night conversations with, the person who had finally found where he belonged. And for the first time in over 40 years, Jonathan Reed didn't feel lost. Sarah woke up that morning with an idea in her head. Jonathan had done so much for them. He had shown up every day. He had brought food. He had played with Ava. He had listened to her vent. He had been present in a way no one ever was, and she had no way to pay him back. She didn't have money to buy a gift. She had nothing of value to give, but she could make a dinner. She looked at the little she had in the pantry, the result of the groceries Jonathan had brought. There was pasta. There was tomato sauce. There was a small piece of meat. There was bread. It was possible to make something simple but made with love. Sarah spent the day preparing. She cooked the sauce slowly, with basic but well-chosen seasonings. She seasoned the meat well. She made the pasta just right. Ava noticed the activity and got excited. "What are you doing, Mummy?" "I'm going to make dinner for Jonathan," Sarah said, stirring the pot. "Really?" Ava's eyes sparkled. "Is he going to have dinner with us?" "He is. If he accepts." "He'll accept," Ava said with conviction. "He always comes." Sarah smiled. It was true. When Jonathan arrived in the late afternoon, as usual, Ava ran to the door. "Jonathan, Mommy made dinner, a real dinner." Jonathan looked at Sarah, surprised. "You made dinner?" Sarah looked flustered, wiping her hands on her improvised apron. "I did. Nothing too fancy, but I thought it would be nice for us to have dinner together for real. If you want to stay, of course." Jonathan stood still for a moment. He looked at the small table, set with what they had. A cloth Sarah had washed and ironed. Simple plates, glass cups. Nothing luxurious, but done with such care. He felt a tightness in his chest. "I would love to stay." Ava jumped for joy and pulled him by the hand. "Come, I helped set the table." Jonathan let himself be dragged. Sarah served the food out and they sat down, the three of them around that small table that barely fit everyone. But no one complained. The food was simple, pasta with tomato sauce and bits of meat, bread and butter, nothing sophisticated. But Jonathan ate as if it were the best meal of his life. "This is delicious," he said sincerely. Sarah smiled, relieved. "I'm glad." Ava spoke non-stop during dinner, telling school stories, showing off the doll that was sitting in the chair next to her. "Holly is having dinner with us too," she explained seriously. Jonathan nodded, equally serious. "It's important that she participates." Ava smiled, satisfied. The atmosphere was warm. The mood was intimate. There was no music playing. There was no elaborate decoration. But there was something better. There was presence. There was affection. There was family. Between the conversations, there were silences. But they weren't strange or uncomfortable silences. They were silences of people who are happy together, of those who don't need to fill every second with words. After dinner, Ava began to get sleepy. She dragged herself to the old couch, lay down with the doll, and in a few minutes she was already asleep. Sarah picked up the thin blanket and covered her daughter carefully. Jonathan helped clear the plates. They washed the dishes together, in silence, side by side at the small sink. When they finished, they went back to the table and sat there, each with a cup of lukewarm tea in their hands. The light in the room was dim. Only an old bulb in the ceiling illuminated everything with that warm, yellowish tone. Jonathan looked around slowly. He saw Ava sleeping on the couch, hugging the doll, her little face peaceful. He saw the simple table, still with breadcrumbs. He saw Sarah on the other side, looking at him with that gaze full of affection and gratitude, and something inside him collapsed. He put the cup on the table and took a deep breath. "Sarah," he began, his voice low. She looked at him, attentive. "What?" Jonathan looked at his own hands. He stayed silent for a few seconds, gathering courage. Then he began to speak. "I've always been alone." Sarah didn't answer. She just listened. "Ever since I was little, my parents were rich, but absent. My father lived for work. My mother lived for parties. They gave me everything except attention, except presence." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I grew up alone in a house full of people, nannies, servants, but no one who really cared about me." Sarah felt her chest tighten. Jonathan continued, his voice becoming more choked. "When I grew up, I tried to make friends. I tried to date. I tried to connect with people, but it never worked. I was too closed off, too cold, too distant. People got tired of me, and they left." He looked at Sarah, his eyes glistening. "They all left, girlfriends, friends, everyone. And do you know what I did? Nothing. I let them, because deep down I thought they were right, that I really was hard to love." Sarah felt the tears well up. "Jonathan?" But he continued, as if he needed to finish. "At some point, I accepted that it was better to be alone than to see everyone leave. It was less painful that way. So I stopped trying, stopped getting close to people. I built walls. I stayed alone on purpose." He took a deep breath, trembling. "And I was used to the loneliness. I had accepted that it would always be like this, that I would die alone bound with no one caring." He looked straight into Sarah's eyes. "Until I met the two of you." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah had tears running down her face. Jonathan wiped his own eyes quickly, embarrassed to be so vulnerable. "You let me in. You let me be part of this here. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere, that someone wants me to stay." Sarah reached her hand across the table and held his. "We want you to stay," she said, her voice choked. "You're not cold, Jonathan. You never were. You're just hurt." Jonathan squeezed her hand back. "I was so afraid of getting attached to you, so afraid that one day you too would get tired and leave." "We won't," Sarah said firmly. "Sass, we won't leave." Jonathan closed his eyes, letting the tears fall. They stayed like that for a while, hands held over the table, without saying anything else. They didn't need to. Everything had already been said. Sarah finally understood. She understood his loneliness. She understood why he showed up every day. She understood why he got attached so quickly to them. He wasn't a bored billionaire doing charity. He was a broken man looking for a place to call home, and they had become that place. Dinner ended not with a kiss, not with romantic declarations, not with empty promises. It ended with a profound silence, full of understanding, full of mutual acceptance. Jonathan stayed a bit longer. They talked quietly so as not to wake Ava. They talked about small but important things. When he finally stood up to leave, Sarah went with him to the door. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me stay," he replied. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Jonathan left, went down the stairs and went away. But this time he didn't go away alone. He took with him the certainty that he had found something he had looked for his whole life: a family. After the dinner of truth, everything changed. It wasn't a sudden change. It was subtle, but it was real. Jonathan kept showing up every day, but now it was different. He didn't come just to help anymore. He didn't come out of obligation or pity. He came because he wanted to be there, because that place had become his place. He was more relaxed. He laughed more. He asked more questions. He told more stories about his day. He didn't have that stiffness from before, that invisible wall that kept everyone at a distance. Sarah noticed the change, and she changed too. She became more comfortable with him. She trusted him more. She shared more things. She asked for his opinion on small daily decisions. She laughed at the cheesy jokes he made. It was as if both had finally understood that this wasn't temporary. It wasn't fleeting, it was real. And it was going to last. Ava, for her part, already treated Jonathan as part of the family for a long time. She didn't have the barriers that adults had. To her, Jonathan was simply Jonathan, the person who showed up every day, the person who played with her, the person who mattered. On one of those days, Jonathan was sitting on the floor of the room, helping Ava assemble a simple puzzle he had brought. Sarah was in the tiny kitchen, washing dishes, but she could hear the two of them talking and laughing. Suddenly, Ava stopped assembling the puzzle and looked at Jonathan with a mysterious smile. "I have something for you," she said, with that tone of someone who has a secret. Jonathan looked at her, curious. "You do? What is it?" Ava got up quickly and went to the bed. She picked up a piece of paper that was under the pillow, folded with care. She came back and handed it to him, still smiling. "I made this. It's for you." Jonathan took the folded paper. He looked at the girl, then at the paper. He opened it slowly, and when he saw what it was, he was completely paralyzed. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, made with colored pencils, simple, unpretentious, but full of meaning. On the paper, there were 3 figures drawn: a tall man in a dark coat and brown hair, a woman with long blonde hair, and a small girl, also blonde, holding what looked like a doll. The 3 of them were holding hands. Behind them, there was a simple little house with square windows and a door in the middle. Smoke was coming out of the chimney. And above everything, right at the top of the paper, a big red heart. Jonathan couldn't speak. He just looked at the drawing, his eyes fixed on those 3 figures holding hands. Ava sat beside him, pointing at the drawing with her little finger. "This is you, this is Mommy, and this is me with Holly." She smiled proudly. "I drew us." Jonathan remained frozen. His throat was tight. His eyes began to burn. He looked at Ava, who continued smiling at him, innocent, not understanding the impact of that drawing. "Do you like it?" she asked, a bit insecurely. Jonathan couldn't answer immediately. He just nodded, his voice stuck in his throat. "I do," he finally said, his voice coming out husky and low. Ava got excited again. "I thought a lot about what I was going to draw. Then I remembered you said you never had a real family, so I made our family, with you too." The girl's words hit Jonathan like a high-speed train. He looked again at the drawing, at the 3 figures holding hands, at the red heart on top. It was simple. It was just a child's drawing. Crooked lines, colors outside the lines. But it represented everything he never had, everything he always wanted and never thought he would have. A family, a place, people who wanted him there. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. He tried to hold them back, but he couldn't. A tear fell on the paper, wetting the corner. Ava noticed and became worried. "Are you crying? You didn't like it?" Jonathan shook his head quickly, wiping his eyes with his hand. "No, I loved it. It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received in my life." Ava smiled, relieved. "Seriously?" "Seriously," Jonathan said, looking into her eyes. "Thank you very much, Ava." He folded the paper with all the care in the world and kept it in the inside pocket of his coat right near his heart. Sarah appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on a cloth. She had seen everything from a distance. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Ava gave me a drawing," Jonathan explained, his voice still choked. Sarah looked at her daughter, then at him, and understood. She approached slowly and sat on the floor beside them. Can I see?" Jonathan took the paper from his pocket with care and showed it. Sarah looked at the drawing and felt her chest tighten. She saw the 3 of them there, drawn by her daughter's small hand, united, together, a family. She looked at Jonathan and saw the tears still shining in his eyes. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice low. "It is?" Jonathan agreed, holding the paper as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Ava, not completely understanding the adult's emotion, was just happy that he liked it. "Now you have to keep it forever," she said seriously. "I will keep it," Jonathan promised, "forever." And he knew he was going to keep that promise. That drawing was going to stay with him for the rest of his life, because that simple piece of paper, with crooked colored pencil drawings, represented the moment everything changed. The moment he realized, without any doubt, that he didn't want to be alone anymore, that he didn't want to go back to an empty house anymore, that he didn't want to live without those two people in his life anymore. He wanted to stay. He wanted to be part of that family drawn on paper. He wanted to be the man in the dark coat, holding the hands of the two of them. And at that moment, sitting there on the floor of that small room, with Ava beside him and Sarah watching, Jonathan Reed made a decision. He was going to do everything in his power to protect those two, to take care of them, to be present in their lives, not because he had money, not because it was an obligation, but because they had become his family, and he was never going to let them go again. The drawing remained kept in his pocket for the rest of the day, and when Jonathan went away that night, he put the paper in his wallet, along with his important documents, because it was important. It was physical proof that he belonged somewhere, that someone wanted him there, that finally, after 42 years, Jonathan Reed had found a home. And this home wasn't a house. It wasn't a physical place. It was two people. A strong woman and a girl full of love, and he was going to do everything to never lose this. In the weeks following the drawing, Jonathan began to make changes in his life. Small changes at first, then bigger ones. He adjusted his schedule, cancelled meetings that weren't urgent, refused invitations to social events that he used to accept just to fill the time. He started leaving the office earlier. He started prioritizing afternoons and nights with Sarah and Ava. His employees noticed. Some commented quietly, surprised. Jonathan Reed had never been one to leave early. He was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. But now it was different, because now he had somewhere to go, he had someone waiting for him. Sarah noticed the changes too. She saw that Jonathan was reorganizing his whole life to fit them in, and that scared her a bit. "You don't need to do this," she said on one of those days, while they both had tea after Ava fell asleep. "You don't need to change your life because of us." Jonathan looked at her serious. "It's not because of you, it's for me. I'm doing this because I want to, because you two are the most important part of my day." Sarah was quiet. She looked at her own cup. "And what if one day you regret it?" "I won't regret it," Jonathan said firmly. But Sarah still had fear of getting too attached, fear of Ava getting too attached, fear that all of this would suddenly crumble. Jonathan noticed her insecurity and decided they needed to talk for real. On another day, after the simple dinner Sarah made, they both stayed at the table while Ava watched cartoons on the old tablet Jonathan had given her as a gift. "Sarah, we need to talk," Jonathan began. She looked at him, her heart accelerating. "About what?" "About the future. About this here. About us." Sarah swallowed hard. "Okay." Jonathan took a deep breath, gathering the right words. "I know that all of this happened fast. I know that we've known each other for a short time, but I need you to know that this here is real for me." He looked into her eyes. "You two are real to me, and I want to be part of your lives. For real. Not as someone who only shows up every now and then, but as someone who stays." Sarah felt her eyes sting. "Jonathan." "Let me finish," he asked. "I know you're afraid. I am too. I'm still afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize I'm not enough, that I'm too closed off, too complicated, and choose to leave too." His voice trembled at the last part. Sarah reached her hand across the table and held his. "We don't want to leave, Jonathan," she said, her voice firm but sweet. "We don't want to go anywhere. We want a place to stay. And you. You are this place for us." Jonathan squeezed her hand. "Are you sure?" "I am," Sarah said without hesitating. "You appeared in our life when we needed it most. But it wasn't just that. You stayed. You chose to stay. And that means everything to me." They stayed in silence for a moment, just holding each other's hands. Ava, who was on the couch, turned her head and saw them. "Are you talking serious?" she asked, curious. Sarah smiled. "We are a love." Ava turned off the tablet and came to the table, climbing into the chair between the two. "About what?" Jonathan looked at the girl. "About us. About family." Ava tilted her head, thoughtful. "Are we a family?" Jonathan looked at Sarah, who nodded slowly. He looked back at Ava. "I think so. If you two want to..." Ava smiled in that way that lit up everything. I want to. I like it when you're here. I like you. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. He passed his hand on her head with affection. I like you too. Very much. Ava looked at her mother. And you, Mommy? Do you like him? Sarah gave a low laugh, wiping her eyes which began to water. I do, daughter, very much. Ava clapped her hands, happy. Then we are really family? And like that, with the simplicity of a child, everything was decided. They talked more that night. Deep conversations, conversations about the future. Jonathan talked about his fears, about how he had spent his whole life believing he wasn't made to have a family, that he was destined to stay alone. Sarah talked about her fears too, about how she was afraid of not being enough, of failing Ava, of not being able to give her daughter everything she deserved. You are more than enough, Jonathan said. You're the best mother I've ever seen. Sarah wiped the tears. And you're the best thing that happened to us. They talked about what family meant, about how family wasn't just blood. It was choice, it was presence, it was care. Family is who stays, Sarah said. And you stayed, Jonathan nodded. And I'm going to keep staying. Ava had returned to the couch, but she kept hearing bits of the conversation. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. She understood that Jonathan wasn't going away, that he was going to stay with them. And that was all she needed to know. When Jonathan went away that night, everything had changed again. It wasn't just mutual help anymore. It wasn't just deep friendship anymore. It was family, for real. It was love deciding to stay, deciding to build something together. Sarah remained standing at the door after he left, looking at the empty hallway. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. She didn't feel alone. She had someone. Ava had someone. And this someone had chosen them. Had chosen to stay. Jonathan, descending the stairs of the boarding house, felt the same. He had spent 42 years looking for where to belong, looking for a place that felt like home, and he had found it, in a small and cold room, with a strong woman and a girl full of love. He looked at the dark sky while walking to the car, and for the first time in his life, Jonathan Reed felt complete, not because he had money, not because he had success, but because he had a family that he chose, and that chose him back, and this certainty, this feeling of finally belonging somewhere, was worth more than anything in the world. He got into the car and before starting, took his wallet from his pocket. He opened it and looked at the folded drawing that was there, the three of them holding hands, the red heart on top. He smiled, and he drove home knowing that soon, very soon, that drawing was going to become reality, because love had decided to stay, and this time it was forever. Jonathan spent 3 days thinking before making the final decision. 3 days walking through the huge and empty house, looking at the rooms that were never used, the silent kitchen, and in the end, he knew what he needed to do. He arrived at the boarding house on a late afternoon, more nervous than ever. Sarah opened the door and noticed that there was something different about him. Is everything okay? It is. I just need to say something important. Ava was drawing on the floor. Jonathan sat in the old chair, and Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. He took a deep breath. Sarah, I want you two to live with me. Sarah's eyes went wide. What? I have a huge house, full of empty rooms, and you two are here in this place with no structure. It doesn't make sense. You can live with me. Sarah stood up, nervous. Jonathan, I can't accept charity. It's not charity, he interrupted. It's family. You said yourself that we are family, so why shouldn't we live together? Sarah was quiet. I'm afraid of losing my identity, of you starting to command my life. Jonathan held her hands. I don't want to command your life. I want to build a home together. It's not about control, it's about being together. Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of tears. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? Jonathan countered. I don't want to be separated from you anymore. I want to wake up and see Ava. I want to be present. Ava looked at the two. Are we going to live in Jonathan's house? Sarah looked at her daughter. She saw the hope in her eyes. I need to think. All right. Sarah spent the night thinking and realized that Ava deserved more. She deserved it too. The next day, when Jonathan appeared, Sarah had already decided, we accept. Jonathan remained paralyzed. Seriously. But with one condition, I want to work, I don't want to be supported. Jonathan smiled. I already thought about that. I have a vacancy at the company. If you want it, it's yours. Sarah covered her mouth, crying. Ava jumped for joy. We're going to live in a real house. The move happened a few days later. They didn't have much. A few clothes, some belongings. The holly doll, the drawing of the three together. When Sarah and Ava entered Jonathan's house, they stayed in silence. It was huge, beautiful, with a spacious living room, modern kitchen, stairs. It's too much house for just one person, Sarah said. It was, Jonathan corrected. Now it's not anymore. He showed Ava's room, large, with a new bed, shelves, desk. Ava ran inside. Is it mine? It's yours? She jumped on the bed, laughing. Jonathan showed Sarah's room too, spacious, with its own bathroom. In the first few days, there was adaptation. Ava ran through the house, discovering everything. Sarah was still shy. But Jonathan included her in everything, asked for her opinion, asked what she liked. Little by bit, the house was changing. The silence gave way to laughter. The kitchen began to have the smell of food. A child's voice echoed. The house that was cold before was now alive. Jonathan arrived from work and was received by Ava, running to him. Sarah prepared dinner. They had dinner together, the three, as a family. 2 weeks later, on a quiet night, they were in the living room. Sarah was reading on the sofa. Jonathan was using his laptop. Ava was drawing on the floor. Suddenly, Ava got up and went to Jonathan. She pulled the hem of his shirt. Jonathan looked down. What is it? Ava looked up and said, Daddy, look at my new drawing. The world stopped. Jonathan remained frozen. What did you say? Ava tilted her head. Daddy, look at the drawing. Jonathan felt his eyes fill with tears. He couldn't answer. Sarah had put down the book, watching. Aren't you going to look? Ava asked. Jonathan closed the laptop and knelt on the floor. He took the drawing with shaking hands. It was another drawing of the three of them, inside a house, smiling. It's beautiful, he said. His voice choked. I drew us in our new house. Jonathan let go of the drawing and pulled her into a tight hug. He let the tears fall. Daddy, she said quietly, are you okay? Jonathan let out a sob mixed with laughter. I am. I'm great. He held her little face. You can call me that always. Okay, Ava smiled. Okay, Daddy. That word broke the last barriers inside him. Jonathan hugged her again. Sarah got up and went to the two, knelt and hugged the two together. There, in the middle of the living room, the three remained hugging. A family that wasn't born from blood, but that was born from the courage to love after so much pain. Jonathan had spent 42 years alone. Sarah had fought alone for years. Ava had lived without a father figure, but now they had found what always lacked. Jonathan wasn't the lonely billionaire anymore. He was a father. Sarah wasn't the desperate single mother anymore. She was loved. Ava wasn't the girl asking on the street anymore. She was a daughter. We are a real family now, Ava said. We always were, Jonathan replied. Since the day you asked me if you could spend Christmas with me. Sarah smiled. Who would have thought a child's question was going to change everything? It did, Jonathan said. It changed everything. And it did change. The house that before echoed silence now echoed love. The man who before lived alone now had a family. The woman who before didn't have anywhere to go now had a home. The girl who before didn't have a present now had a father. And together, they built something that none of them thought possible, a family, for real, forever. That night, after Ava fell asleep, Sarah and Jonathan remained in the living room talking. Thank you, Sarah said, for everything. Thank you, Jonathan replied, for letting me be part of this. They looked at each other and understood. It wasn't about who saved who. It was about how they saved one another. Jonathan looked around the house, saw Ava's toys scattered, saw Sarah's shoes near the door, saw life happening there. And for the first time in 42 years, he felt at home. Sarah looked at him and saw not the rich man who appeared in their lives, saw the man who stayed, who chose them, who became a father. And Ava, sleeping peaceful in her room, dreamed of the family she finally had, a family born not from blood, but from the courage to love. And that was all they always needed. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.